before that, God's gonna give us a little bit of a warning. We've already prayed, we've had scripture, we've had testimony. I don't think it's a correction necessarily, although if God uses it for you today as a correction, then that's fine. But it's not how God gave it to me as a correction. It was a word of warning. There's a big difference between a word of warning and a word of correction. A correction is if you're going the wrong way, God gives you a word and says you're going the wrong way, you need to make an adjustment. Sometimes it's big, sometimes it's little. Might just be a small correction, but God is going to bring you back to the path that He has for you. I don't believe this is what God is doing today. I believe it's a word of warning for us to be aware of something that could happen to us. And then it also is going to involve a prophetic word, I believe, is how God spoke it to me. And please understand today, when I don't know how it works for everybody else, but when God gives me a prophetic word, it's not always something I understand or can explain.
Right.
And so just I'm going to ask you today to not ask any questions during this, because I feel like God needs to speak today. And I'm going to do my dead level best to stay out of the way and let Him speak to us and give us what He has for us. And then when I get done, let's just take a minute or two and let it sink in, let it process before anybody shares anything, because I just feel like God wants to speak specifically today. And so in Genesis 22 is the story of Abraham, and when God spoke to Abraham in Genesis 22, it says, verse 1, sometime later God tested Abraham, and He said to him, Abraham, here I am, he replied. Then God said, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. This is one of my least favorite stories in the Bible. It's always been one, even though I know how it all works out, I still don't like it for some reason. But so God spoke these words. He said, take your son, your only son. Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and take him up on a mountain and sacrifice him there. Now, realize something. Abraham, when he was 75 years old, he was living with his family. He was living comfortably in a community. He was part of the community. He was part of a family. When he was 75 years old, God called Abraham out of that. And He said, Abraham, I want you to leave your family. I want you to leave everything you know. I want you to leave everybody you know. And I want you to go to a place, because I'm going to make you something special. I'm going to use you to bless all the nations. And if you go back to Genesis chapter 11, you can read that story. Abraham was 75 years old. We know the story. For 25 years, Abraham waited for God to fulfill that promise. For 25 years, Abraham walked in the desert. He walked in a land that was not his own. One of the things that God told Abraham up front, He said, I'm going to make not only you great, but I'm going to make the generations that come after you, your descendants great. And that was God's calling, and that was God's bringing about His chosen people. We know them as the nation of Israel. And of course it was through Abraham that this was all started. And He told Abraham up front, He said, when you get to this land, you're going to walk in this land for all of your life as a stranger. He said, this land is going to be given to your descendants, but you will not have it. You will not own it. It will not be yours. Even though I'm promising it to you, I'm not going to allow you to have that land, but it will be yours. It'll be your descendants. And so he called Abraham when he was 75 years old, and he called him into this land. So Abraham obeyed the voice of God. He took everything that he owned, took his wife Sarai and his nephew Lot, and left his home, left his family, left his community, and went to where God told him to go. Just a pure act of faith. When he gets into this promised land, God again meets him there, and he says, Abraham, I'm going to bless your descendants. You're going to have a son. Remember, Abraham was 75, 80 years old at this point, and he says, you're going to have a son, and through that son, I'm going to bless the entire world. You're going to be a blessing to the world. And so Abraham waited. For 25 years, Abraham waited. And just about the time when Abraham had exhausted and run out of hope, God showed up and said, I have not forgot about you. I am going to give you a son. And that was the time when God, Sarai was listening in her tent, and she laughed. She said, I'm way too old. Understand, Sarah by this time was 90 years old. Abraham was 99. And by this time, both of them thought they were too old to have children. Sarah, her womb had dried up. She was no longer physically able to have children. So we can understand why Sarah laughed. And Abraham probably thought, oh yeah, here we go again, another promise. Remember, several times God had appeared to Abraham and said, you're going to have a son, you're going to have a son. And we know that during that time, they had run out of hope, and Sarah had come up with this cockamamie scheme to give Sarah her slave woman to have a baby through her, and they were trying to circumnavigate and go around God's plan and create help the plan of God out, which is always a mistake. And they had Ishmael. And by the time that Isaac was born, Ishmael was 11 years old, and we know how that all worked out. Those people are still fighting today. They're launching rockets at each other over in Israel. The descendants of Ishmael are fighting with the descendants of Isaac. Yes. And it's always a mistake to try to interject your own plan into God's plan. But that's what they did. And so we find Abraham 25 years later, finally Sarah conceives miraculously. And it's nothing short of a miracle that Isaac is born. And so they send Ishmael away so that Isaac will be the only one that will inherit the blessing that God has promised Abraham and his descendants. And so, at this point in Genesis chapter 22, Isaac is now a young man. And God comes to Abraham one more time. Now understand something. Abraham was 75 when he was called by God. For 25 years, he waited for God's promise. He waited for God to fulfill his promise. 25 years later, Isaac is finally born, and then another several years go by, and Isaac is now a young man, and now God comes to Abraham, and he says, Abraham, I want you to take your son, your only son. He specifies it. He says, your son, your only son whom you love, and I want you to offer him as the sacrifice. I want you to go to a place that I'm going to show you, and there I want you to offer Isaac, your son, your only son, as a sacrifice. And Isaac and Abraham, they set out with some servants. They get to a point, and finally Abraham, God says, it's right over there where I want this to take place. So Abraham tells the servants, he says, you guys stay here. Isaac and I are going to go over there, and we're going to offer a sacrifice to God, and then we'll be back. And so Abraham takes the wood for they carried the wood with them, and the fire and the knife that Abraham was going to use to offer his son Isaac as a sacrifice. And Abraham puts all of the wood on Isaac's back, and Isaac and Abraham then set off, and they go a little ways away from where the servants are, and they prepare the altar. On the way, Isaac is starting to get curious. He's saying, Dad, he said, we have the wood. He's got it on his back. He says, you got the fire, because Abraham was carrying a little pot that they would carry fire in. He says, you got the fire and the knife, but where's the sacrifice? And Abraham said, God will take care of that. Yeah. God will provide the sacrifice. I don't know what Abraham was thinking at this point. But they finally get to the spot. They build the altar. They put the wood on the altar. And I have no idea how this all took place, but somehow Abraham tied Isaac up and had Isaac laid out on the altar. And he had the knife. When he reached for the knife, I don't know if he had the knife in the air. I don't know if he just had the knife in his hand. But he was all ready to sacrifice Isaac, following God's directive. And finally God spoke up and said, stop right there. And Abraham looked up, and over in the thicket was a ram. Isaac went over, took the ram, let Isaac go. They sacrificed the ram together, and God then spoke to Abraham again, and he said, down to verse 12. God spoke to Abraham when Isaac was on the altar, and he said, do not lay a hand on the boy. He said, do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. And he looked up, he saw the thicket, they get the ram, they sacrifice the lamb, and after their sacrifice is done, God speaks to Abraham, and he says a third time. He says, I will surely bless you, in verse 17, and make your descendants. Wait, I'm sorry. Verse 16. The angel of 15, the angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, I swear by myself, God swears by his own name, I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. As I was reading this, I thought about the fact that 3 times God referred to Isaac as Abraham's son, his only son. He could have just said, I want you to take Isaac and sacrifice him. He could have referred to Isaac as your son. But 3 different times God uses the same language, the same description. And whenever in the Bible you see God repeat himself 3 different times, you need to take note of what he's saying. Think about in Isaiah where Isaiah said the angels cry out, holy, holy, holy. There's several times in the scripture, and there's actually not that many. We're not going to quote them all today, but there's several times where God actually uses the same language or the same description of something 3 different times. Whenever God does that, whenever something is mentioned 3 times in a row, you need to pay very close attention to that. And this is one of those times. 3 different times God refers to Isaac, not just to Abraham. He doesn't just say, bring Isaac your son. He says, your son, your only son. He specifies that not only is Isaac Abraham's son. Now, I don't know about you. I'm a dad. I have 2 sons. I can't imagine offering either one of those boys up as a sacrifice. I can't imagine, I have 3 daughters. I can't imagine offering any one of my children. I can't imagine what it would feel like for God to say, I want you to give me one of your children. But yet God not only asked Abraham to give up his son, he specified and he reminded Abraham in the language, he said, not only is Isaac your son, he's your only son. God was reminding Abraham here when he asked Abraham to do this. He says, I want you to give up not only your son, but your only son. What he was saying to Abraham is he was reminding Abraham, he says, I'm reminding you that Isaac is not only your son, but he is your destiny. Everything that I promised you years ago, when I called you into the promised land, when I called you out, everything I promised you about the descendants that you were going to have, and you being a blessing to the entire world, everything was tied up in Isaac. Remember when Ishmael was born? And right before Isaac was conceived, Abraham asked God. The last time that God had spoke to Abraham and said, I'm going to give you a son through Sarah. And Abraham pleaded with God. He says, why don't you just let Ishmael be that son? Why don't we just use Ishmael? We've already got him. He's here. He's 10 years old. Why don't we just, why God do we have to do it your way? Why don't we, Sarah and I already took care of this. And God said, nope, ain't going to be Ishmael. He said, we're going to do it my way. And he said, a year from now, you're going to have a son through Sarah. His name's going to be Isaac, and that's going to be the promise. That's going to be your destiny. So when God came to Abraham here, not only he was asking Abraham to give up his own flesh and blood, he was asking him to sacrifice, to give up to his own destiny. The very thing that God promised. For 35 or 40 years, Abraham has existed and lived with this promise. He left everything. Now it's true, God had blessed Abraham with material possessions, with material wealth. Abraham had more now than he had at the beginning. His herds were bigger. His wealth had increased. But Abraham knew that all of that would be wasted if God didn't fulfill his promise that he had promised his destiny. This was one of the last things that happened in Abraham's life. From Genesis 22 on, we see that there's nothing else recorded that Abraham does other than get a bride for Isaac. This is towards the end of Abraham's life. This is towards the end of his. He had a very active life. When you read the story of Abraham, the entire Genesis 11 through Genesis 22 is all the things that Abraham did and all the places he went and all the things that he accomplished, both good and bad. He had seen a lot. He had done a lot. Everything that's happened, Abraham is now towards the end, and he's ready to pass on everything to Isaac at this point. Everything's been accomplished. His destiny seemingly has been fulfilled. For years, Abraham lived on nothing but a promise. Many of you have done the same thing. You've been living on God's promise. You've been waiting for God to deliver on something that he said was going to happen to you. Some of you have been waiting for God to bring your children back. Some of you have been waiting for God to deliver on promises that you received as a young person. And you're not a young person anymore. But you're still waiting. You're still holding on to that promise of God's destiny and God's plan for your life. And just like Abraham, many times in his life, he reached a point where he said, God, are you sure? And you've actually tried. You've got a few Ishmaels running around in your past. Things that you tried to do to help God's plan along because you didn't think God was on the ball enough. You think God fell asleep at the wheel, and so you tried to, like Abraham and Sarah, you said, well, I'll help it along. I'll get off the path here, and I'll go over here, and I'll create an Ishmael. And you've got a few of those running around in your past. But God said, nope, that's not my plan. This is my plan. I have a plan for you. Yes. And so for years you have followed God and you have faithfully trusted God to take care of what he said. And when things would come up, you might waver, you might falter a little bit, but then you would get back on the path, and you would get back on your faith, and you would say, nope, God said this, and he was going to do this, and I'm just trusting him to do it. But then, like Abraham, right towards the end, when it looks like finally everything is going to fall into place, and you see your destiny being fulfilled, God comes one more time, and he says, I need you to give up your destiny. For years you've waited and trusted. And now that you can see it happening, now that you can see the end in sight, now that you can see how things are going to work out, God is saying one more time, I want you to give it all up. That's what he was asking Abraham. I want your son, your only son. Not just your flesh and blood. Not just the son that you waited for 25 years for. But I want your destiny. Now here's the warning. We are always in danger. Always in danger of us taking over God's plan. Don't ever think you're ever going to get so spiritual, so much like God, that you will ever be above this danger. Because the worst thing that can happen is when you take over God's plan for your life and quit following him. Every time I read this story, one of the reasons why I don't really care for this story very much is because I always felt it sort of made God look small. And I always thought, why would God ask this of somebody? Did God need the affirmation? Did he need to feel so important that he couldn't stand that Abraham had somebody else that maybe Abraham loved more than him? And it always seemed like, and I know this isn't true. I know it's not true. But it always felt a little bit like God just was like, nope, I need to be the only one. But the truth of the matter is, God didn't do this for himself. He did this for Abraham. Because Abraham, even after all these years of walking by faith and trusting God, and even after all the miracles and all the times that God has brought Abraham through, there is still a piece of Abraham in him that doubted God. And this exercise, this what seems like just a traumatic emotional roller coaster that God put Abraham through, what it did was it erased all doubt in Abraham's mind that he could trust God. God is getting ready to do something big. But one of the things that we need to understand as we move in, now listen, as we move into our destiny, because that's what we're moving into. Some of us have been praying for something for years. We've been praying for our country. We've been praying for our families. We've been praying for loved ones. We've been seeking God. We've been waiting to see a dynamic, exciting, powerful move of God. We are getting ready to move into that. We are this close to our destiny. It's right there. And God's getting ready to do some powerful things. And I'm going to share a little bit of that in just a minute. But we are getting ready to do that. But before we move into that destiny, we need to have this warning. When we move into that destiny, when we see our Isaac, when we see our son, our only son, our destiny, we need to understand that we still need to walk by faith. I can't even imagine what it was like for Abraham to have to tie his son, his only son, his destiny, the dream of the future, the promise of 35, 40 years, to tie that all up and put it on an altar, and then take the knife in your hand and get ready to put it all to death. I don't know what was running through Abraham's mind. Abraham was a man like I'm a man. I'm assuming he had some doubt. Now, I will say this. Abraham heard from God. You need to catch this. Abraham heard from God. He didn't do this on a whim. He didn't do this as an experiment. You need to be very careful about this. You need to be very careful about offering your destiny up as a sacrifice. You need to be sure and be careful that you are hearing from God. One of the things that Abraham, he was blessed and he was cursed. He didn't have any scripture. He didn't have any religion to fall back on. Everything that God spoke to Abraham was the first time God spoke it to anybody. We don't have that. We've got the entire canon of Scripture. We've got both the Old Testament and the New Testament. We've got the very words of Jesus himself. We've got all of this history. But we need to be careful before you go just on a whim or just like, oh, I think I'm going to offer my destiny up as a sacrifice. You need to be sure that you're hearing from God. Abraham knew he had heard from God. That's why he was able to do it. That's why he was able to pull the knife out of the scabbard. He absolutely had to have 100% total faith in God to go through with this. I don't know if when he pulled the knife out, he thought God's going to come through. Because not only had Abraham heard from God about this event, he had heard from God all along. Yes. And he knew that God would not let him down. But there was still something in Abraham that God needed to erase, that God needed to test him, to bring it out, for Abraham to exercise his faith one more time. That final vestige of doubt that might have been remaining. What we're getting ready to enter into, folks, we have got to be able to walk by faith. We have got to learn to hear the voice of God. We have got to be willing to trust what God tells us. Otherwise, the messiness that we talked about will destroy us without that faith. God said, because you did not withhold your son, your only son, I can bless you. I want to point out that word. When God told Abraham, he says, because you did not withhold, because you did not keep back your son, your destiny, now I can fulfill it. Now I can bless you. See, God could have taken Isaac from Abraham anytime he wanted. And God could take anything from you anytime he wants. But God needs you to be a willing participant in the offering or the giving up of the thing that you thought was your destiny. Right at the time when God is getting ready to move in your life, he might ask you to give it up. He might ask you to give it back. All he's saying to you today is, I want you to be willing to give me anything. You know, it's hard enough for us to give up our bad habits, our sinful habits. That's hard enough for us to give up. But when God starts asking us to give up stuff that are good things, and then our destiny, that's a whole different proposition. But God is saying today, I'm getting ready to take you into abundance. I'm getting ready to take you into prosperity. I'm getting ready to fulfill your destiny. But before you can get there, before you can walk there, I need to know, are you willing to trust me? Are you willing to walk by faith? I think it's in Hebrews that in the New Testament that God said that Abraham pleased God because of his faith. It wasn't because of what Abraham did. It wasn't because of what Abraham said. He said it was by faith that Abraham pleased God. And it's only by faith that we're going to be able to please God. Folks, what I'm telling you, and here's the warning, we've got to learn and continue to know how to walk by faith. In this case, it required blind faith. That's not always the case. Sometimes faith makes sense. Sometimes God asks us to do things that make sense logically. But this did not make sense logically. There was no logic to this. And Abraham had to have absolute 100% faith because of what God was going to do. And he said, because you did not withhold, because you were willing to give up everything and trust me totally, 100%, I can bless you. And I can fulfill the destiny that I promised for you. God's getting ready to move in our country. On Monday, we, at our picnic, when Shar sang that song, Lee Greenwood song, I'm proud to be an American, we were having dinner with Heidi and Karen on Thursday night, and we got to talking about Monday and stuff, and in the middle of the conversation, Holy just all of a sudden the words of that song came back to me, and they became very prophetic. That song is, how's it start? If tomorrow all the things I worked, all were gone, that I worked for all my life, and I had to start again with just my children and my wife. I thank my lucky stars to be living here today, where the flag still stands for freedom, because you can't take that away. When I started playing those words over in my mind, I believe God dropped into my spirit that he's getting ready to change some things. Things we've been praying for a long time. Said if tomorrow all the things were gone I've worked for all my life, for a long time, the enemies of God have been working to destroy our country, to destroy America, to destroy the idea of America. It's not so much that they want to destroy our country, it's just that Satan can't stand the idea of America. Because America is God's idea. It was God's idea. It is God's plan. It was God's plan. And Satan hates that. He doesn't hate our country as much as he hates the idea. He hates the idea of what America is. And so for years, Satan has been actively at work trying to destroy that idea. The idea that is written about in our very Constitution. Satan has been trying to destroy that. And so what God is saying is, he says, if tomorrow, all those things that they've worked for all their life, because it's been a lifetime of Satan's work, if all of those things are gone and there's nothing left and we have to start over, because that's what's getting ready to happen. We're getting ready to start over. God's getting ready to reset the thing. And all those things that have come against our country and that are in place right now to destroy our country, to destroy the idea of America, all those things that are in place, God's getting ready to disrupt those things and destroy those things. Those things are going to be gone, and we are going to start over. If all those things are gone, and we have to start over, and it's just going to be God's plan. And then it says, trying to recite the words in my heart, my mind here. I have to start again with just the children of my life. I thank my lucky stars to be living here today, where the flag still stands for freedom. That's important. The reason that the enemy wants to destroy our flag is because it stands for freedom.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
We need to remember, we need to understand that our country is built on that concept. It's on the concept of freedom. And that's what the enemy's been trying to destroy. He's been trying to destroy people's freedom. Satan hates the fact that people are free. Because when you're free, you can worship God. When you're free, you can praise God. When you're free, you can come into relationship. And so Satan is trying to enslave people always and forever. The very lie that Satan told in Genesis chapter 3 to Adam and Eve was designed and created to enslave mankind. And from then until now, there's been a battle between good and evil. And God has been working to set people free, and Satan's been working to enslave people. And so along comes a country like the United States of America, and the entire concept of the United States of America, and what our flag stands for is that freedom. And God is saying today, the flag still stands for freedom, and you can't take that away. No matter what they do, they're not going to take that away. They cannot destroy the freedom that we have in God. And God is getting ready to bring our nation, our country, our culture back into that freedom, to what our flag stands for. Because they can't take that. They can't take the freedom that you have in your heart. They can't take the freedom that you have in your relationship with God. They are trying to destroy that very foundation of our country. And God's getting ready to upset that apple cart. And where that flag still stands for freedom, they can't take it away. And I am proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. And I won't forget those who died and gave that right to me, because people died.
That's right.
People have shed blood so that we could have that freedom. And we won't forget those people. We won't forget those who died to give that right to me. And even on Monday, as we sang these words together, And I didn't understand what was going on Monday, to be honest with you. Cindy insisted that poor Shar have to sing this song for us. Those of you that weren't here, Heidi's sister was here, and Cindy isn't like this at all, but she insisted that this poor girl have to sing this song a cappella without any warning. She said, you have to do it. Even Cindy afterwards told me, I didn't even know why I was doing it, but I just knew we had to do it. So Shar sang that song for us, and then she made us all stand up and sing it together, remember?
Yes.
And I didn't even know what was going on, but the one thing I remember is as we were standing there singing that song together, and we got to that line where it says, I'm proud to stand up. I'll proudly stand up next to you and defend her still today. I'll never forget what went through my spirit is I was so proud to be standing up next to each one of you defending what God is doing.
That's good.
Because this thing is not going to happen in a vacuum. And we are going to be called on to stand up and defend what God is doing. And then the song, the last line, defend her still today, because there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA. I know it's just a song. I know it's just song, and I know the lyrics are beautiful, and I love that song. But there's something about those words, God bless the USA. Everything hinges on that line. Everything hinges on God blessing the United States of America. Everything hinges on God blessing us. Without God's blessing, we're just another country. Without God's blessing, we're just another group of people. Without God's blessing, we all can be friends and we can fellowship together and we can have a good time. Without God's blessing, that's all we are. It's just another group of people. But with God's blessing, we can change the world. Everything hinges on God blessing what we're involved in, what we're doing. God bless the USA. God bless our country. God bless the USA, the country that He created, the country He designed, the country that was His idea. One more thing, and I'm not sure why I need to say this, but I do. This week I saw someplace that it's, what are they calling it, Pride Month?
Yeah, that's correct.
And when I read that, I saw you see it all over the place, but I saw it one time this week. I saw it. It's a specific time, and when I saw it, it really rocked my spirit because I thought, why are we proud of that? And God said, you shouldn't be proud of that. It's like we've taken a whole month and we're shaking our fist in God's face and saying we're going to be proud of our sin.
Right, yeah,
Why would we be proud of that?
right.
It'd be like me saying I'm proud that I'm a liar.
Yeah.
I'm proud that I'm a thief. I'm proud that I'm a gossip. I'm proud that I'm a fornicator. I'm proud of my sin. Folks, we shouldn't be proud of it. I'm not saying every one of us, I'm not, listen to me. I'm not condemning anybody. I'm not speaking condemnation on anybody. But we all have sin in our life. We all have things in our life that we would like not to have there. But we shouldn't be proud of it. We should be embarrassed. We should be ashamed. You've heard me say before, I think I'm the biggest sinner that ever lived. I really do. But I don't ever tell you what my sin is. You know why? Mostly because I'm embarrassed of it. I'm ashamed of it. The only reason I'm telling you I'm such a great sinner is because someday I'm afraid you're going to find out and you'll think I was holding out on you. But that's the truth. I'm not proud of it. I'm not going to go around marching and holding up a flag and saying, oh, I'm so proud of all of my sin. No, I'm embarrassed of it. I'm ashamed of it. We should be ashamed. And here we are celebrating Pride Month for something that we should be embarrassed of. Something that we should be ashamed of. Something we should keep in the back where nobody can see it. But the very things that are an abomination to God, we should be ashamed of. Unfortunately, we all have things in our life that are like that. And I'm not saying we're not trying to do better, to be better, but we shouldn't be proud of it. And what God told me is He hates pride. He hates pride. And He especially hates it when we're proud of something that He has already told us that He doesn't like. And we need to separate ourselves from that. In Numbers chapter 16, I'm not going to go over there and look, but there was one of the many times that Moses faced a rebellion. And a group of men came to Moses and said, we don't like what you're doing, we don't like where you're taking us, we're gonna take over control of this thing, and we're going back to Egypt and so forth and so on, and we think we're just as good as you. And there was a group of men that formed a committee, and they all came and they had their list of demands and their complaints and so forth, and they came to Moses, and Moses said, okay, tell you what we're going to do in the morning. You guys bring your censers, your pans that we can offer incense on. You bring yours. Aaron and I are going to bring ours, and we're going to see who God listens to. So the next morning they have this little contest, and of course Moses and Aaron, God chose Moses and Aaron. He rejected theirs. And then God told Moses and Aaron, He says, tell everybody to get away from these people because I'm getting ready to destroy them. And Moses actually got down on his face before God, and he said, God, please, he said, it's not all the people. He said, it's just a few of the leadership that really rebelled. He said, have mercy on the people. And God said, okay. He said, tell the people, get away from those people because I'm getting ready to destroy. I'm getting ready to pass judgment on that. Folks, God is getting ready to pass judgment on people, and we need to be separated. We need to come away from those people, because if you don't, you're going to fall into the pit that He's getting ready to drop them into. And if you read that story in Numbers chapter 16, you'll see that's exactly what happened. Those people were left, those men that had formed that rebellion, they shook their fist in God's face and said, we're going to do it our way. We're proud of what we are. And God had rejected them. But before He rejected them, He told the people, He says, everybody get away from them because I'm getting ready to destroy them. And if you read the story, you know that as those men stood in their doorway of their tents with their family, the earth literally opened up and swallowed them alive. But here's what I'm saying. Before God did that, before that happened, He gave the people an opportunity to separate from them. He said, get away from them. And one of the things that God's been speaking to us now for a year or so is He's saying, you better be on the right side. You better be on the right side. I don't know how this thing's going to go. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what God's going to do. But I do know this. We had better be on the right side. From everything God showed me this week, I think he's getting ready to pass judgment. I think he's getting ready to make a definite choice, a definite decision between good and evil. I don't believe God's done with America. I believe he's going to pour his blessing out. I believe he's going to reset his... That's the word he gave me this week. That's what I'm standing on. I'm not making a guarantee. I'm not saying it's going to happen on Tuesday or Thursday or Friday. I'm not saying it's going to happen in the next month. I'm just saying I'm trying to tell you what God has been speaking to me, and I believe he's getting ready to draw a line in the sand. And you want to be sure you're on the right side. You want to be sure you're on the right side. Don't be connected with people that are shaking their fist in God, that are saying, we're going to do it our way. I don't know what's going to happen. But it's important that you choose the right side. And it's important that we learn and we know how to walk by faith. Because it is going to get messy. And when I say it's going to get messy, it's going to get messy in the sense that we're going to see things. We're going to see deliverances. We're going to see healings. We're going to see moves, supernatural things happen in the spirit realm. That's going to be messy enough. But you know what else is going to be messy? We're not going to understand each other all the time. We're not going to like each other all the time. Every one of us in this room, we all got different personalities, and we all got different ways of doing things. You know what? It's going to get messy sometimes. I'm not always going to like the way Michael does it. He's not always going to like the way I do it. God's going to move differently in Sue than he's going to move differently in me. He's going to take different people, different places. They're going to have a different message. They're going to be doing this the way God leads them. And we're not always going to understand each other. Sometimes we're not even going to like each other. When Cindy talked about the dustpan and her moving around and cleaning up the mess, you know what I thought of? I'm not cleaning up your mess. I can't. I can't. I can't make you like each other. I don't even care if you do like each other. But you have to love each other.
Yeah.
We have to love each other.
Yes.
And we have to walk by faith. You ever wonder what Isaac thought? What was going through his head when Abraham was tying him up? How did he even do it? Did he say, okay, Isaac, I'm going to tie you up now? Wow. Isaac was a grown man. Isaac carried the wood when they walked to the altar. He wasn't a little boy. He was a strong young man. He was strong enough to carry the wood. It wasn't just a few sticks. It was a load of firewood. And it says Abraham put that on his back. And he carried it along. Abraham was an old man. All he carried was a knife and a fire pot. There's no doubt in my mind that Isaac could have overpowered his dad. What was going through his mind? I don't know. Did he hit him over the head? Knock him out? Wait till his back was turned and throw a rope around his arms or something? I don't know how he did it. I know he had him tied up and he had him on the altar. Your destiny is in your hands. It's right here. Today. God is showing us what we've been praying for years. It's happening right in front of us. We're seeing the deliverances. We're seeing the healings. We're seeing the power and the move of God. It's starting right now. It's moving through the country. It's moving through our culture. I know it looks sometimes, like if you watch the news, it looks like the enemy's winning and it looks like we're losing. But I'm telling you, God is he's at work. He's moving. And some of us have been praying for this for a really, really long time. We have been waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And now it's here. Now it's right in front of us. Now you have your destiny in your hands. And God's saying, I might need you to give it up. I might need you to let go of it so that I can do it.
Amen.
I might need you to let go so that somebody else can steal your thunder. It doesn't seem fair because you guys, you've been waiting and carrying the load when all around you everybody else was just sort of marching through life. But God is raising up a whole new generation of warriors to take us into the future. And now God is asking us to give it up and to let them have the glory. You got to trust Him. You've got to trust God right now. We have got to trust God right now with what He told us. What? Now listen to me. What did He tell you? What did He tell you about your destiny? About your future? About what He was going to do in your life? That's what you have to hang on to right now. Because it's right in front of us. But yet He's saying still, there's one more final great act of faith that you're going to have to let me do it. You're going to have to let me do it my way. I am your God. You can trust me. I promised you years ago. I promised you a lifetime ago. And you fill in the blank with what God promised you. But I promise that to you. I am a God of my word. I will not let you down, but you have got to let go of it. It cannot be yours anymore. It cannot be your destiny. You have got to give it back to me so that I can fulfill it, so that I can bring it to pass. Doesn't seem fair, I know. Wait all these years. Go through all this stuff. All of the waiting and the sacrifice and the commitment when nobody else was paying attention and everybody else was out partying and it was just you on your face before God and it was just you trusting God. When the dark of the night, when everything seemed lost and you couldn't see how it was ever going to happen, and still you held on, still you walked by faith, still you trusted Him, and all through that time you just kept your eyes focused on Jesus. And now here it is, right at the end, and your Isaac, your destiny, your son, your only son. The destiny that God has promised you, it's in your hands. You can touch it, you can taste it, you can feel it, you can smell it, and it's right there. And now God is saying, I need you to let me have it again. We can trust God. We can trust God. He'll bring us through. He'll make it happen. I have a sense of our collective destiny. I don't know that I know exactly what it is, but I have a sense of it. But I don't know what your personal destiny is. I don't. I believe each one of you has one. I believe each one of you has had a promise from God, a purpose in your life that you've lived for a long time. And you've been just holding out. I remember years and years ago when my kids were young, and Cindy and I were so I say broke. We wanted to be broke, and we thought if we could be broke, that would be fantastic. We were below broke financially, and I remember not knowing. I remember not knowing where we were going to get food to feed our 5 children, small children. My wife one day, God bless her, she had to make a meal. Remember the little onion soup packets that you get to make recipes with? She made a meal out of that for our children one day. They were sitting at the table having onion soup for supper. I wasn't home. I don't know what I was doing, but that was all the food we had on the table in our house that day, and they were all sitting around and they were trying to pretend that it was good. Onion soup tastes horrible. Those soup mixes, they're good in gravy and they're good in recipes, but they're not really that great of a meal. And so all the kids, God bless them, they were all like, yeah, this is pretty good. But that's where we were. That's where we were. There was a time in our life when we were like that. And I can remember going out and praying and telling God, I said, God, you got to take care of my family. You got to provide. I don't know how to do it. And I don't know how many times I reached to this point where I'd say, God, if you don't do it, if you don't provide, then I'm going to just keep on believing. I'm just going to keep on trusting you. You know, I'd get to the point where I'd be ready to give God the ultimatum. You know, if you don't do it, I'm going to trust you. Because that was all I ever. Yeah.
That's right.
I'm going to trust you.
I'm just going to trust you. That's all I'm going to do. And he did. He pulled us through. He pulled us through. He pulled us through. And we never starved to death. We had onion soup once, but we didn't starve. And God took care of us. And now here we are. It's years later. And all that time I walked and carried. And so have you. You've been there. You know what I'm talking about. It might not have been onion soup, but there were days when you thought, I don't know how I'm going to survive tomorrow. I don't know how I'm going to get through today. You weren't worried about tomorrow. You were just worried about getting through the next hour or the next thing. And it might not have been finances. It might have been your health. It might have been a child that was rebelling. I don't know what it was, but you walked through that and you stayed the course. And today we're standing here in our living room, and God's destiny is right at our fingertips. He's getting ready to move in a powerful way. And he's saying, I need you to trust me. I need you to have faith. Faith. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. I didn't want to go this long today, but I just need you to hear from God today. I need you to hear what he's saying right now. He's speaking. Just listen to him for a few minutes. I'm going to be still. I'm going to be quiet. Just listen to the Holy Spirit of God speak to you for the next few minutes.